much. Thank you, yeah. Thanks for coming, everybody. It's great to be in Shanghai and to have such a great audience of people. I thought I'd just say I've got something to show the Chinese delegates. Whoops. That's a good start. You can bring that up. So, let's give this a go, shall we? So 人是福报的时代，让我们共同为富豪说宽放。Okay. Well, so this is the diversity, so I'm guessing those that don't speak or read Chinese don't know what I'm talking about, but it's essentially saying, time of the signs, let's celebrate Semiofest together. So I just thought I'd say that. Yeah, because it's great to be in China, and my second time here, and the first time for Semiofest to be here. So I'm really pleased to be in such a semiotically rich country, such a rich culture, and also, I'm a massive fan of calligraphy. This is not my calligraphy, but I do calligraphy. But my topic today is very different. My topic today, as Vladimir says, is actually what we call iconic triggers in the brain. And I'll come on to describe what those are. But basically, these are the questions I had. So essentially, it's a long-standing question I've had, which is, when we talk about semiotics, we talk about signs. But how do we actually process signs in the brain? How are they embodied? And how do we know which ones cross the threshold? Because we're bombarded with signs, but how do we know which ones our brains register? Sometimes this is a question clients ask, like, okay, so you decoded this, but how do we know whether consumers people actually register these things? So there's sometimes a frustration being asked uncomfortable questions by clients. There's a precedent here, so I've done research into how we process how sound and music influence our interpretation of advertising. And I've also written a paper on meditation and semiotics. So I'm interested in the phenomenology, like the mind and how we cognize signs. Obviously, self-education is important. I think the best way to learn about something is either to teach it or to write a paper on it, and you get to learn much more about the subject. Because often when I read books, I read them and I forget them. But if you write a paper about something, the knowledge is much deeper. That's my experience. And also, I was inspired by a debate on the semiotic thinking group between two people I quite respect. And plus, I have a connection. So the company Neuroinsight, their logo you see on the right, this is a company based in the UK and Australia who do neuro tests. So essentially, they help advertisers look at various readings. So when they create advertising, they compare different versions and they benchmark their advertising against other advertising to look at the levels of memory encoding in the brain, the attention, and various other metrics. So basically, I met the marketing head, and she was very happy to collaborate on this project. So she made the data available and some equipment available, and previous projects available to me to analyse. But yeah, essentially two quotes here. From two semioticians on the semiotic thinking group. So many of you know what the semiotic thinking group is. It's a professional networking group that a lot of us take part. If you're not on it and you are on LinkedIn, you should definitely try and join. It's got about 2,500 members now. There are two quotes here. So the top, we've got Duncan Bowie, who's based in the States, and he said, neuroscientists are semiotically illiterate. They don't understand semiotics or culture. They relish the frameworks and clarity semioticians can bring to the process of test design and analysis. So he's essentially saying there's a lot of potential for, and he's done this himself, as well with people like Ryan Lindstrom and others, to bring semiotics together with neuroscience. The quote at the bottom is by a chap called Massimo Leone, who's a brilliant semiotician. He's come to 2 Semiofests before, and he writes a lot about semiotics. And there was a debate between him and Duncan Bowie, which took in all sorts of things, including the meaning of an erection. So, you can explain that as a blood flow and physiology, but what's the culture that underlies the erection? If I watch a pornographic film, do I have an erection or not? And is that to do with my immersion in what is sexy to me, and that's the cultural construction. So he talks about that as a way of explaining the threshold between neuroscience and semiotics. Don't worry, I'm not going to show any pictures of erections today. Essentially the quote was saying, I think that hard sciences, including neurophysiology, can offer important insights to semiotics, providing that semioticians don't start mimicking neuroscientists. And remember, their work is to find meaning in brains. It's not to find meaning in brains, but to find brain in meanings. And I think I like that quote, but I think for me it's about seeing, experimenting. I don't like to just rest on my laurels and accept what's out there. I want to try and change things, do new things. People said that Semiofest was a crazy idea, but myself and Lucia and Kishore and Hamsini, we understood we could create something new, and it's that's the result of people that don't take what other people say as accepted wisdom and try and challenge. So neuroscience, ostensibly on the surface, neuroscience and semiotics are very different. They have different missions, different premises. So in neuroscience, they do experiments and they collect data. In semiotics, on the basis of our experience and cultural knowledge, we make what we call deductive reasoning. So that's where we don't have all the evidence, but we come to conclusions. Neuroscience works on neurobiological facts. They say the blood flow increased by 50% into the neurolateral cortex, or there was a spike in brain response by an index of 10 or 12. Whereas in semiotics, we have observations, or we take pictures and we use that as cultural evidence. Neuroscientists experiment in the lab. We make readings of cultural material, as we've seen this morning. And the neuroscience says we have these instruments that measure, and we have a sample of this much. In semiotics, we talk about interpretive validity, that we can make these interpretations based upon our experience, upon our knowledge of the culture, and we show how science develop over time. But what they have in common is we both distrust consumer response. And we distrust that the consumers can know themselves what they really think about something. And they're both, neuroscience looks at the brain, semiotics looks at culture, but they both have this in common. So the rise of neuroscience. Essentially neuroscience has become more popular in the last few years, and there's a number of factors for that. There's pull factors and push factors. Pull factors, we understand a lot more about how the brain works these days. Over the last 20 years, there's been a lot of research into what they call specialisation of brain function. So you can look at a certain part of the brain, and you can understand that maybe 2 or 3 parts of the brain together are responsible for a certain type of feeling. Or when one part of the brain is damaged, people are unable to do certain things. So that's the kind of clinical neuroscience. That enables us to measure parts of the brain and make fairly reasoned some suppositions as to what is happening. And there's many techniques for doing sensoriness, EEG, electrical signals, fMRI, which is measuring the blood flow in different parts, and SST, which I'll come into. And the cost of equipment is going down. On the other hand, the reasons why people are being pushed away from traditional research methodologies is because qualitative research has its limits. People are realising that we need to go beyond that. In marketing organisations, people want to circumvent the research effect of judging respondents. They want to get directly in to understand what the meaning is, not just by asking people. And also, the other thing is that research privileges the left side of the brain rather than the right brain. You hear this term talked about a lot, but essentially the left brain tends to focus more on the detail and often the language and semantics, whereas the right side of the brain is much more about the big picture, the holistic synthetic learning, and about what emotions is that in itself is something we've learned a lot more on the last few years. But also people want effectiveness and process of proof and decisions. This has been driven by the desire for ROI, so this is another reason why people are being pushed towards neuroscience. Just on this left side of the brain, right side of the brain thing, I'd ask you, can I ask this lady here, can you just read the first line on the left, but if you say the colour, not the name, quickly. Okay, well done. I bet it would be quicker though to read the names. Why do you think that is? Because in Chinese, okay, that's a good answer. And essentially, the reason why it's difficult to do, but probably when I asked you the question, there was a little bit of, you had to think a bit. And the reason is because one side of the brain is immediately wants to read the world, and the other side of the brain is trying to work out the colour, and those two lobes of the brain are fighting with each other. And that shows that because research is basically reported opinion, the left brain overrides the right brain. And this is what neuroscience is designed to counteract, essentially. Thank you very much for your great answer as well. So this technique of SST is called steady-state topography. It's a patented technology that neuroinsight use. And it's overseen by a professor called Richard Silverstein in Australia. He's a very eminent professor who's written hundreds of papers on memory encoding and advertising effectiveness. This is the main thing, is that there's a very strong correlation between long-term memory encoding and advertising effectiveness, which is very simple to say. If something is encoded in the brain, you're more likely to recall it. And there's papers that have been written on, jam advertising, where people recall the advertising, what has registered the higher readings. And look at they correlate the people who registered at the time of the experiment the higher readings were in the brain, and they correlate that a month later with the people that have shown the greatest brain preference towards that new brand, and there's a very strong correlation between the two. So that's a very strong sort of postulation there for those two that are linked. Anyway, so SST overcomes this. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but let's just say it's a more pure methodology, and essentially it generates a flicker in the brain of a kind of baseline brain response, and then when essentially they put subjects into a room and they attach, they're told all about the stuff, they attach these kind of skull caps to them with felt pulses, and these pulses are attached to different parts of the brain. While they're watching advertising, they measure the electrical signal from this baseline. And they take these readings, they pass them through amplifiers, and they're stored back in the central computer, and then these readings are fed back, and they can look at how people respond differently. Their brains respond differently to different parts of advertising, but also different versions of the same ad, and I'll be showing you that a bit later. So what are archonic triggers? Well, we'll try this pointer now. If you look at that sinusoidal wave there, if you imagine these are the memory encoding of an ad that is like maybe 30 seconds long, if there's logos or product placements embedded in the ad, you can understand why client would want to see a product placement correlating with a high spike of memory encoding. So they want to see that at the point their product's being shown, the memory encoding is high, which is a suggestion that image has been committed to memory. So, I've said this memory encoding and advertising effectiveness, but they call these peaks of response archonic triggers. Now, in semiotic language, archonicity is a very technical term, which is a very specific meaning to do with resemblance. I think this is quite a loose terminology, but essentially just means that these are things that trigger a high response. And the research question for me is the extent to which these can be called archonic, and how semiotics can add understanding of what caused these peaks of brain response, basically. Sorry, I'm going back. Essentially, their hypothesis is that the things that cause this peak of brain response is kind of narrative, so how narrative works, and how you can sequence narrative to maximise the way people take it in. Also personal relevance, when something's more relevant to someone, and more likely to register it more. And the third thing is kind of emotional resonance. And it's the emotional side that I decided to test in this little experiment with a semiotic basis. I'm just going to show you this film which shows you some peaks of brain response. So if you can hit it, yeah.
And now we're back in the living room. And now, bedroom. And
so you may or may not have seen that. It's called Walking Fridge, and it was a big success for Heineken. Obviously, the premise being that based on gross gender stereotypes, you probably have some truth to them, which is why they're funny. So see the women see the walking wardrobe with all the shoes, and the guys, they hear the guys screaming, and they've seen us walking fridge with a bunch of Heineken on the other side. And what's interesting is two things. The memory encoding you've seen, when 10 seconds is when you see the women start screaming. There's a massive emotional uplift. But it's not only the fact they're screaming, but it's also the expressions on their faces. And there's something called mirror neurons, which is discovered by Giacomo Rizzolatti. He's written this as an Italian neuroscientist, but he essentially says that we are programmed to be empathetic, and the way we do that is when we see someone in pain, when we see someone happy, we, as human beings with empathy and limbic systems, we respond and we feel a little bit of that emotion. Obviously, it depends on the situation, but we're hardwired to do that. So when we look at advertising and we see facial expressions and emotional expressions, we experience some of that emotion. So that excitement and exhilaration. And then the other response is, when it's dipping, it goes up again, is when you see the guys doing it. So that registered it was a very successful ad, and I think partly because of the emotional content, but also these peaks of memory encoding. And at the end, when you shoot saw Heineken, very effective brand placement. Another ad just to show you on memory encoding. Can you turn the volume down a tiny bit? So it's a short version of ad that came in 2009, Caviar's Gorilla, just to show you the comic triggers. So very basically, oh my god, it's a gorilla, with human expressions. 2, he's playing the drums. And 3, it's an ad for Caviar's chocolate. So those are the sort of triggers, and that narrative function of kind of planting a surprisingly intriguing question, giving some suggestion of what it is, and then the brain pay off is quite a common narrative. You can see how that correlates with some memory encoding readings. So blue line is basically, these are 2 lobes of the brain. So the blue line is actually the detail side. The blue line, let's sort of be honest, the other one. The blue line is the left side of the brain. Yeah, it's the system 2 brain, and the red line is the detail. What I've been told is not completely intuitive to me why you expect sometimes with more emotional responses there isn't more of a divergence, but it's something that has been explained to me and I can't be completely articulate about it. But yeah, the blue and the red line show the different sides of the brain. The red line's more detail and the blue is the more holistic, big picture, emotional side. Although emotion, as I say, we've learned a lot about emotions, and this idea of emotional and rational is a weird one because we can't make decisions without an emotional brain. So I think the last few years we've learned a lot about this false dichotomy between these 2 areas. Now, just to go into a bit of semiotic theory, what I see is that neuroscience is great in that you can actually see the response of the brain to visual stimulus. Now, in semiotics, we make very strong inferences and hypotheses about what might be leading to certain responses based upon cultural readings and our knowledge of the way culture and visual culture works. And that's all very well, but it's great to have, on this side, the interpretants. We know that interpretants are happening. Interpretants, this is Peirce's trichotomy triangle that says that in semiotics and semiosis there's a representation, there's a sign of something that has a meaning mediated by an interpretant. So the sign points to an object through an interpretant. I could call this sign, I could call this meaning. Probably easier to do that, but this is his original terminology. And what I would suggest is that neuroscience is great at saying something is happening in the brain, there is some interpretation going on. And it's really good at saying what, but it's really good at saying what, there is an interpretation. It's great at saying where it's happening and when it's happening, but it's not great at saying how or by how much or why, crucially, and that's where semiotics comes in. Because semiotics can say, well, it's probably referring to this narrative, or it's about a grouping function, or it's this metaphor that's causing it, by looking at the text, by reading the text. And semiotics can also deconstruct montage, a film. Is it because of what was being seen now, or is it a primary effect for something that happened earlier, or is it the music that's doing it? neuroscience can tell us nothing of this stuff, which is why Duncan Berry said that neuroscience is semiotically illiterate, because their job is to basically hook people up to these things and be very good at presenting the data. And they make some inferences about what it means, but they can't deconstruct the text and correlate what's happening in the brain that they measure to what's happening in the text. So that's why I think semiotics has got some something to say. Did you play this?
No, she's in Miami.
Okay, so there's a later doing the usual kind of jet set decals, driving into the 60s, Northern Greece and John Movie kind of narrative, with the requisite English cheekiness of the guy doing the shimmy in the X-ray scanner. But I guess the interesting thing for me is that, you know, it was interesting to hypothesize about what fluorescent memory encoding would cause with peaks and down response, and essentially the hypothesis was that a change in scenario and music would be the biggest drivers, and that's kind of what happens in terms of when the kind of soundtrack kicks in, the groove helps generate this multimodal surge in memory encoding, signalling very clearly a change in what's being seen. This brings up an important point: is it the content that you see at any time is bringing up the memory encoding, or is it just the disjuncture between the new thing and the previous thing? So there's all sorts of imponderables to do with what generates memory encoding, and I've certainly not solved this. I will show you in a minute one area where I think semiotics is starting to get towards some answers. But I think if any area or any discipline is going to help neuroscience, it is semiotics, because it is the most sophisticated method for deconstructing text and hypothesizing about what generates meaning. So that's why I think it's a fruitful collaboration. Okay. Obviously my favourite subject, which is me. So I've got some facial expressions here of myself done by an artist. Okay, so I made a film for Semiofest, and I wanted to use it in some context. So basically I've repurposed the film from its original context into doing a little test, and the test is on how emotional empathy for emotion or emotion expressed on the face can maybe have some effect on these various readings. Readings like memory encoding, emotional intensity, a withdrawal or approach response, visual attention. These are all things that neuroinsight measure when they show ads. So essentially what I decided to do is I got this designer and a video editor to import 3 different types of emotional expression. First of all, I had a face, happened to be my face, in the scenario, this narrative which we'll see, and that's one version. The second version was with emoticons, and basically these different emotions are the following. So you've got surprise, what's this? Happiness, yeah, I don't look that happy, but what's that one? Anger, disgust, yeah. Yeah, but it's not a very good one, that one. It's meant to be neutral. I mean, that's probably better than that is. I need to be neutral. Anyway, that was the idea. And the idea is that I showed ads before I showed the faces in the ad that you would expect in normal circumstances might evoke that reaction. But essentially, the whole narrative was a pretext. It wasn't really about the narrative. It was about these little signs that were embedded. Not to see whether people would notice them, but to see what reaction and whether there was... So I showed these two versions, one with the face, one with the emoticon, and the third version was just with the emotion written in text. So I had literally in text, happy, surprised, happy, angry, disgust, and neutral. And we then looked at the different readings. That's what we're going to go into now. So I'll just show you the form, if you can play through. You've got the reading at the bottom. Okay, so the ostensible point of the narrative in the context of the test was semiotics helps you make more emotional communication. So you've seen there's various ads with emotions prepared with them. And the idea is this is showing you what advertisers want you to do, but the bottom line is most of us screen out advertising. So the message was that you need to create emotionally engaging advertising. Semiotics can help you, but that wasn't really the point of it. That was just a pretext so the consumer wouldn't go where the hell they're watching. Because remember, this was put in a commercial break with other ads, like through Semiotics and through Arning and other brands. So we tried to make it look like there was some kind of message. And I think there was on the exit question there was no one said, what was that weird Semiotics, it was just there, they just didn't comment on it. So what we were looking at was the difference. I showed the same form, so these are the different ways, but I showed the same form with faces in it and with the text. I won't show these to you because they're exactly the same form, but I inserted, where you see those, was a version with the facial and there's a version with text. So this is the one with the text. So you've got surprise, got happiness, and likewise that's kind of turned into lust because we need another emotion. Disgust and neutral. Well, lust actually isn't one of the 7 basic emotions that Ekman... I should have said that there's a guy called Paul Ekman who came out with this idea that there are 7 universal facial expressions across culture that we can recognise, and they are anger, disgust, attraction, happiness, neutral, and a couple of others. Surprise one of them. And so I was trying to evoke those. So those are fairly basic responses, and we thought therefore those would be the ones that would evoke a response in the respondents watching, doing the neuro tests. So I just thought I'd show you some of the results. Just in summary, there are 3, I'm going to flip that, there are 5 different measures. I'll tell you through the results in a second. There's approach withdrawal. Approach withdrawal is the extent to which you feel you want to engage with someone or come back from it emotionally. The second one is emotional intensity. How much intensity do you feel looking at? And this, I think, is the clear story that you can see at the top in every one I've got text and I've got emoticons and facial in the bottom too. The clear story whereby you can look at the emotional contagion in the face, how amazingly, how sort of viscerally we react to a human face, even if it's one we don't recognise or not a loved one or anything like that. But we recognise a face of a human. And how do we also learn to recognise these lines as abstract lines as human as well? But you can see that there's definitely more emotional intensity. And the most striking thing about me for this is that there are 100 people in the sample. We split the sample into 2. For 50 people, we showed the whole sample, the text being first. 50 people saw the emoticon form second in the second break, and the other 50 people saw the facial form second. So it's split. And what people expect is on the second time you see a very similar piece of communication, that the reading should go down. But you actually see an emotional intensity. There's far more choppiness here in these two examples than in text. In engagement, engagement is the first time you see something, it's how engaged you are actually working it out. So it's normal for the first time you see something to be higher, and you can see that is very, very true here with text, because it's the first film we showed, even though it didn't have the faces, it had the text in it. Visual attention, the other thing I think is very, visual attention, yeah, again, the first time you see something, the second time, because this is another thing that you on site do, they look at advertising over periods of time to measure what they call wear out, to the extent to which an advert loses its novelty over time. And certain ads, because they've got so much semantic density, so much excitement and different things packed in, they can surprise you for live and other ads, which are either simpler or there's less going on. And you'd expect over time that to go down, but yet again you've got much more intensity there in these two readings in terms of the dramatic peaks and troughs of the emoticon and facial. One thing I haven't done is that I should have done this probably is put in the moments where the faces pop out, but essentially there's a strong correlation between, if I go back to emotional intensity, there's a very strong correlation between where the, for example, I think this is where the surprise starts, this is where the happiness phase comes in, so there's a very strong correlation between where the peaks are and where the phase comes in, so I think that's really interesting. The truth is, memory encoding is a much more mixed picture, and memory encoding is the one where there's the most links in the chain, so it's a less visceral response. It goes to the visual cortices, through various other parts of the brain, prelateral cortex, and it's much more difficult to measure. So it's a much less clear-cut picture on memory encoding if you compare the three different graphs. But and the results I thought were quite exciting. I think they have grounds for further investigation, because it's the first time I've actually taken a semiotic hypothesis, the hypothesis being that faces will create a more emotional engagement in the same ad than text. It's a very simple one, but I've done one of these before and essentially didn't isolate any variable, just took a text, looked at the readings and then tried to work out what's happening. It's impossible, because you've got so many variables in there. You've got music, you've got colour, you've got typography, so actually isolating the variables is a much better way of trying to say something meaningful that you can defend. So in terms of the concluding results, so approach and withdrawal, emoticon and facial visual cues register both higher and maximum peaks and deeper troughs and trigger greater extremities than do text readings. There's a parallelism in emotional intensity, so they're very similar between facial and emoticon forms, indicating analogous stimulation of emotional centres. And what we call conceptual closure, so that means when the faces go off screen, there's a strong bit. Facial, the other thing I should have pointed out, in terms of engagement, the human faces generate much higher engagement than the emoticons. But actually, if we flip down to the last point, the emoticons generate higher, actually, although there was an unclear picture in general, the emoticons generated higher degrees of memory encoding. Is that because it's a gestalt? It's a simplified version, it's easy to take in? Perhaps it is. These are hypotheses. I don't know what the answer is, but you've got readings, you've got interpretants. We can reason back from that. And then the penultimate point, visual attention in the text form actually falls during the evocation of the word descriptors, and it never fell. Visual attention never failed during showing the face, but it did fall with the text, then denoting this lack of relative attention. Just in conclusions, I think there's support that visceral emotional expression in the form of human faces is a visual cue to provoke emotional contagion. Also, as an operationalised hypothesis was successfully proven to a high degree of statistical significance. It opens the door to more expensive, ambitious test design to generate, a continuum of options. So you could do different things. So I don't want to go into semiotic theory, but you've got icons, indexes, and symbols. Emoticons, or they're called icons, they're more symbolic because there's a conventional cultural learning that means a face. Whereas a human face is just more index, it's more visceral, it's the actual imprint of a human face. But you could probably create a continuum of different kind of graphical styles and then look at how the different responses that they convey. And that's just faces. There's so many different things you could do with text. And semiotics will be generating the hypotheses with reasoning, and then neuroscience will be creating some kind of validity, the validation of that. Yeah, so I mean, this is a commutation test that Roland Barthes wrote about in Elements of Semiology, where he said basically if you want to understand the criticality of meaning in the text, like a poster or anything, either because you want to take that poster and go, what's the most meaningful thing we can put into a TV ad, or vice versa. From this TV ad, what's the trigger we can take out that's going to evoke the biggest reaction? What you do is you mess with the text, you take out different bits and work out which is the one where you lose the most meaning. So that's what I did with this, is basically take a text and change bits of it. But you could do that with colour, with typography, with music. So I think there's a rich potential for full investigation of what visual signs and cues can best trigger long-term memory encoding, and how these signs can be leveraged across media for multiplier effects. And this is what neurons are really interested in is like how you can help come up with what iconic triggers are and how this can best be leveraged. So from a TV ad, what do you use to actually put in a print poster, and how do you create that online? And if you abstract a logo, is it more effective than one that's fully rendered? All this kind of stuff. And I think Semiotics is a really good partner in that process. Hopefully you've got an insight into neuroscience, semiotics, and how they work together, and how to take our questions.